Peace. Welcome to our first part of our conference called Student Voices PA. My name is Jasiri X. I am the co-founder and CEO of One Hood Media. Just a little bit about how this conference came about. We partnered with an organization at One Hood called Allies for Children's to, with support from the Grable Foundation, to actually do a conversation with students about their experience with distance learning. 2020 and 2021 has been some, unprecedented times and unprecedented years. Particularly during 2021, you had, social distancing or distance learning, really a global pandemic, COVID-19. You also had this uprising that happened really not just in the United States, but worldwide, sparked by the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. People calling for, the Black Lives Mattering and our own humanity. We also had one of the most divisive elections that we've ever seen anywhere. And all during this time, students and educators were put into a very unique position. Students are trying to learn, educators to kind of pivot on the fly in terms of making sure our children were educated. So we had a conversation with 50 students from all over Pennsylvania about what they disliked about distance learning, what were some of the issues that they face as far as mental health during this time. Did the protests or uprising have any effect on their schooling, the election, and ultimately what would they like to see change? What would they like to see improve in education? That documentary premieres Friday. It was produced by Your Mom's House. Shout out to Ime Alaquiva, who just recently won 2 more Emmys. He got Emmys on top of Emmys, you know what I'm saying? And so shout out to him. And so, we actually wanted to have a panel every day on the different facets of this documentary. And then on Friday, we'll premiere the documentary and we'll have a panel of students that also appeared in the documentary. And so today our focus is mental health, which of course, we're talking about a global pandemic that was definitely something that affected the students that we spoke to. So we have some experts in the mental health field and education field that will be joining us to kind of have this conversation. Everything's breaking down. No, it's like, it's supposed to be on Facebook. Facebook's breaking down right now. We hope to put it up. Mercury's in retrograde. Y'all know how it is. So we just gonna make it. We gonna make it do what it do with this esteemed panel that we have. So I want to bring them on and kind of ask them to introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about their background. We'll start with Dr. Amy Alexander, who actually helped us bring a group of students from Penn Hills to be a part of this documentary. Dr. Alexander?
Good afternoon. How you doing today?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting this and for doing the project and for all the students and all of the people at One Hood and my esteemed colleagues who are on the panel. Also, just want to thank you for taking the time and putting in the energy and effort to support this project. So my name is Amy Alexander. I am a school counselor at the Penn Hills Senior High School. I've been in the district this is my 26th year there. I was a history teacher, taught 8th grade, and I was also an elementary counselor. Also this year started my own LLC in consulting called Legacy. And I also work for another consultant team that is all African American, called TAP Expert Educational Consortium. I've earned my degrees from California University of Pennsylvania and Duquesne University, and my PhD is in counseling and supervision. I've also worked for the Upward Bound program and have experience in mental health facilities as a clinician in a walk-in crisis center and also working with adjudicated minors.
Well, that is definitely a lot, and you're somebody that you can obviously see has a deep connection to your students, with the students that you brought on, and appreciate you joining us today. Dr. Jones?
Hi, everybody. So great to be here with my One Hood family. So thanks for the invite. Yeah, thank you for those that are on the panel with us. I'm really intrigued by your background. It's going to be so fun to talk with you today and just educating the public. But so where do I start? Well, I consider myself a trauma expert, a trauma specialist. I began doing therapy many years ago, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and so I'm also the director of the bachelor's program here at Pitt, and that's where I got my MSW. My undergrad is in psychology, and my doctorate is in education. And so I put all those different avenues together, and that's who I am today. I'm the founder and president of Freedom Indeed LLC, where I help returning citizens. So I do a lot of expert trauma witnessing for the federal court, but I also do therapy and talk with those survivors of crime in the neighborhood, but especially with our Black folk. That is my passion. So my recent research is on the effects of trauma and how it's a barrier to education. And so I brought in my therapy and my education background and merged it together, and just doing a lot of research and a lot of speaking and thinking about that topic. So this topic is dear to me, and I really am honored to be here to talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you. And we have Bethany from the Staunton Farm Foundation that, as a foundation, does a lot around mental health in our area. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, Bethany?
Yes, thank you for having me on this panel today. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Bethany Hemingway. I am actually born and raised here in Pittsburgh. The Staunton Farm Foundation, we are a local foundation here that provides behavioral health grants to Allegheny and the 9 surrounding counties. But I'm also as a person with lived experience, and I have a story that when I was in high school, I had a very bad outcome with my mental health, and it trickled into me not finding help until I was in college. But that's a little bit about me, but I also have my MSW from the School of Social Work, Pitt alum as well. I started doing services and crisis services, and after I graduated from Pitt, I jumped in and was a behavioral special consultant and mobile therapist for school districts around Allegheny County. So I was able to be in the schools and seeing how the schools and teachers and administrative staff work together. So this is something I'm really passionate about.
So thank you. And you know, if you're watching via YouTube and you want to give us a comment, post a comment or a question, you know, feel free to hit us in the chat and we'll get on your question. I want to start with you, Dr. Alexander, because I know that you are, you know, you function, and tell me if I'm wrong, as like a counselor in the school. Can you talk to me about like what 2020 was for you? Now you're not in the school. How did that affect you, and were you able to still be connected to your students? How did your students reach out to you, and how? I'm guessing, I'm assuming that there were a lot of students that were going through some things that maybe just because of you're in a global pandemic, all this stuff going on. Can you just talk about like what that experience was like for you and how you were able to pivot to make sure the students that you work with got the help that they needed?
Well, it was very difficult, and students reached out in various ways, as did parents and guardians, via telephone, and we did have Teams or Zoom meetings. I was available daily. We were all the staff was in the building while the students were not. So
so you were still there.
We were there. Penn Hills went all last year. Let me tell you, from day one to the last day, we were in the building, and that's no surprise to me, seeing as how the people of Penn Hills are very resilient and very strong. But the students, I was seeing a lot of parents were breaking down, and they were calling me, and students were breaking. I was breaking down, and you know, if I'm being honest about things, because the students bring life. They bring energy. I mean, to me, there's no reason for me to be there without them. I'm a student advocate. So doing things like getting students connected with mental health help, was very challenging. We do have a SAP team, which is Student Assistance Program, but we were hardly functioning. People from our liaison organization were staying, not in person. So it was challenging in that way. And what broke my heart, I think, the most was students who had been really great academics until that point started to have, I had students hearing voices. I had students just, really experiencing some deep trauma, which is also my area, and anxiety and depression. And I was reading on some statistics, and just the numbers were probably higher than most people think. Not these ladies, of course, but before the pandemic, so that just made people, the numbers soared. And I think the best thing that the way that we reached out, we have a school social worker from Pitt, and she also was very instrumental and helpful in reaching students and getting like devices. And I was even reading today, many students didn't not only not have devices to access schoolwork or internet service, but also other basic things that they could get in person at school. Notebooks, pencils, folders, different things like that sometimes we take for granted that everyone has and everyone doesn't. Parents were stressed because they had a child. I'm glad my children are grown, because they had a child in elementary school, a child middle school, a child in high school, and they were having to navigate all the work for these, their children without having been in school for a long time, and without perhaps in some ways being tech savvy like myself. I'm not tech savvy is what I'm saying. And it was just a struggle. And I cannot tell you how happy I am that most of the students in the Penn Hills Senior High School are back in person. And I think something, we can glean some good out of, what is apparently to us on the surface not good, or make lemonade out of lemons, as Beyonce says, and see that the significance of the students and their presence and what they bring to the educational process is. Now, me being a counselor, I think I've always kind of realized that, but it really hit home with me just how they're the engine of education. And as I was watching the documentary, I heard you say that, the education system needs to be torn down and rebuilt to attend to the students, and isn't that the reason that we exist? Because things get lost, right? And, people's interest and various groups' interests and things like that. But we are there to serve them. And even sometimes I have to remind the teachers, bless them, that I'm a student advocate and not an advocate for the teachers. We have a union to advocate for us. But it was very challenging. And I think that most people are very happy to be back in person. And I think it did engender a kind of new respect for each group. The teachers were struggling. The teachers were coming to my office saying, I don't know what I'm doing, and principals and others, from agencies and things like that. So I think it was definitely a universal effect. And it was hard for me. It was hard for the people that I know personally and professionally. And I'm glad, and hopefully that we're coming out of that and with a new appreciation for each other.
No, I mean, I think you make so many great points, particularly about, regardless of what happens, amidst a global pandemic is going to be hard, but to then kind of be thrown totally off of the way you normally do your job, or, learn as far as student goes. Just like you said, sometimes students are, where a lot of the sports weren't able to do it. And so sometimes just that having that after school programming, that's one of the things that I did when I was worked in Pittsburgh Public Schools. And it was like the number of how the graduation rates go up just by participating in after school activities was something that really surprised me. So like you said, those activities Sometimes people need their lunch and breakfast and they're going to student, those things that now folks don't have. And like you said, I have children, and it was like, man, now I got to go and make sure the math is done and the work is done and make sure the internet. So even that was like a really daunting task because I'm also working. But, I feel in many ways privileged. We have different offices at my home, and I understand like everybody didn't have this. So I could only imagine what some of the folks are dealing with and kind of to hear from the students. And, I made that comment. I don't know if I said tear it all down. Maybe I did. I probably did.
Maybe those were my words.
A lot of from what we were hearing, the students were that they felt like, it wasn't really about it was like this work has to be done. This has to be turned in. And there really wasn't a conversation about how this, and a lot of people that work regular jobs felt like that as well. Like, hey, and I want to come to you, Dr. Jones. Kind of about that, I saw one report that said that 81% of teenagers talked about experiencing more stress. We're talking about trauma. Now we're kind of thrown into this, lockdown. At the same time, we're seeing, images after images of Black people being killed on video or brutalized in front of us. What did you see last year, and what were some of your experiences as somebody that people go through with trauma? I mean, were your doors like being like kicked down in a sense?
Well, here's the thing, and you pinpointed. We look at the pandemic and say that is a traumatic event, but y'all, it's ongoing. This doggone thing gonna go away. So it's ongoing. The lockdown in and of itself was a traumatic event. And so data suggests that there were disruptions in the brain development caused by social isolation. And we forgot that it was a long time, y'all. Brother Jasiri, I understand what you mean. I am not a K through 12 educator. I am a college professor, and my kids would make fun of me because I can't do ninth grade math. What are you doing? I can't do this stuff. So it was very stressful for parents. Dr. Alexander, you touched on that too. Very stressful for parents. The resources were low, and the children, I mean, if you think about it, when they're locked down in isolation, that's decreased physical activity, decreased social interaction, their increase in screen time, and their sleep patterns are all messed up. And the thing is, teachers were really focusing on, we have to make sure that they're getting this education. Teachers' number one priority is to make sure that their kids aren't falling behind. They truly did care. They were very intense about it. But the thing that we were neglecting was the social interaction. And so what came about with that? Well, those children with pre-existing conditions like anxiety, disruptive behavior, depression, what happened with them? Well, they had a greater impact. And so now, like you said, they're beating the doors down. There is a waiting list out the wazoo to get into therapy, individual and family therapy, even group therapies backed up. Because people are like, my kid's depressed, there's suicidal ideations, the anxiety is through the roof. I don't know if I'm going to get sick and die. What if you get sick and die? And now I'm starting to see a trend where people are like, I don't care anymore. I'm taking off masks and hugging people. And I'm just caution, oh, well, throw it through the wind. And, because we're so tired of these doggone masks. But that is just such a large weight on our shoulders, and cognitively, if you think about the heightened awareness that happens with, am I going to get sick? Oh, this pandemic is happening. Or now that I've been in social isolation for so long, boom, I'm around everybody. Everybody's around me. And so then you start feeling like, get away from me. Get away from me. You're too close. If we think about that, what does that do to the brain? Think about a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old. That is a lot of activity. It's a lot of activity for adults. And so their frontal lobe, that executive authority part of the brain, can't concentrate, make good decisions. The impulse control is not there anymore. And a lot of times we're seeing those behaviors that not being able to concentrate. I'm seeing it I saw that at college level, not being able to finish their homework or assignments, coming in late, not attending school at all. And then again, sleep problems and all, it's a vicious cycle if we don't interrupt it.
Wow, I mean, you said so much. I know, just like you said, as a parent, my youngest son was in karate, he was in soccer, just like you said, just even that physical stuff and all that kind of had to be shut down. And that, he just be video gaming it, you know what I'm saying? So it's like trying to get back to like, let's be active and let's be, he had a situation, he goes to school, he went to school for 2 weeks. Somebody in the class tested positive, had to leave for a week. And so like, I know this is kind of this new world, a new reality, but like you said, it just puts an extra pressure on everybody that's a part of it. And I would say, even if there's a waiting list, please, like if you have not sought therapy, I don't care if you feel good during this time, just during this time, I would encourage you to look at therapy, look at family therapy, because of all the things that happen. Now, Bethany, we know the Staunton Farm Foundation, and those of us in West Pennsylvania, we know your focus is mental health. I know many foundations kind of COVID hit, kind of began to kind of jumped in to help, and we appreciate that. Can you talk a little bit about what 2020 was for you and the Staunton Farm, particularly in the midst of this situation that caused a lot of folks to experience a lot of mental health crises?
When 2020 hit, it was very interesting because I remember I had just came back from a conference in Chicago. It was the end of February, and I was actually supposed to be going to Seattle right before the shutdown happened. And I did not want to go to Seattle because I was like, it's there. Why would you be sending me there? And we were actually ready for our first quarter board meeting, bringing basically our regular docket of grants up. And we just paused. We said, let's take a moment and see what happens. And our board was very, really thoughtful and just said, let's take this money that we know we have earmarked and turn it into emergency funding, because we know that people are going to need co-payments for mental health insurance, getting technology to students, because that was a huge thing that we knew that iPads weren't being bought or surfaces, anything that we can get to students to keep them in their education, but also so they could keep with their therapy, because we knew telehealth became a thing. And telehealth is here to stay for now. That's something, there's waivers. That's a whole nother can of worms to open up later at a later date. But we really just pivoted and just to make sure that we're providing things on the ground that we normally, like we were buying people computers to keep in touch, Wi-Fi hotspots, co-payments, putting money towards food banks so people were able to access food. So thinking of the hierarchy of needs, just making sure food, shelter, and those needs were being met. And then we can dump into the mental health stuff, because right now, if people's needs aren't met, the mental health part is not going to matter. And you're not going to get the treatment. You're not going to get good treatment if you can't have your needs even being met. So that's how the foundation pivoted really quickly when COVID first hit. And right now we are starting finally coming back to our normal funding cycles. But a lot of it, we jumped in and we did a lot of mental health first aid training for educators, because we knew when these kids were coming back to the school, to at least get educators some type of mental health literacy so they understand, to see that this kid might be acting out of sorts. It might be trauma. They're acting out of trauma and not being a bad kid per se. Their experiences might be acting, because we all have different experiences and we all react differently. So just giving teachers extra tools in their tool belt, because they have so much power in their hands to be able to tell a kid, like, oh no, now you're going to the principal and now we're going to the school to prison pipeline, instead of giving them these little tools and educating them. So we've been doing a lot of educating just around just simple mental health literacy to school districts.
No, I think that's super necessary. That's actually it kind of goes into a question I have for you, Dr. Alexander, because like I said, a lot of the young people felt that mental health, their personal mental health wasn't being prioritized. What I find interesting about this generation is that, at least mental health is more talked about. I always joke around, I come from the suck it up generation, and you just sucked it up like it wasn't even, feel like therapy. What are you talking about? Suck that up and just keep moving. What I love about this generation is it is more open about mental health and of therapy. Has just kind of like, and I think I touched on it. As the students have come back, have you seen there be more of a focus on mental health, or more of a conversation around making sure that, as the students are in the building, that they at least have access to some of these things?
I don't think it's more attention, to be honest. I think it's a different type of attention.
Gotcha.
I think that we've had, like I said, the SAP team, we've had school-based therapy in the Penn Hills Senior High School. I think the whole school district has. So that students, sometimes it's just, like I said, the practical stuff like pens and pencils or paper or glue or whatever it is that people need. In this instance, when we're talking about mental health, people don't have rides. We have parents who are working 2 and 3 jobs. How are they supposed to get their child into, make an appointment, drive them there, or make sure they get to somewhere that may be across town or may not be, safely, and be able to engage and really benefit from consistent ongoing therapy? So, and I have to say, the Penn Hills School District has had that school-based therapy so that there's a space in the school. And I tell my students, I don't know anything about what goes on in this therapy. It's not my business unless you share it with me. But there's a space set apart. It's not in our counseling suite, where students can go to, weekly, to have that attention and that interaction with someone who is trained to be able to help guide them through the processes of figuring out what's going on with them and how they can navigate in the world around them as who they are. And my assumption always, since I've, had the privilege of being a little bit more educated on things, has been that whenever someone of color comes to therapy, we have to integrate the assumption as therapists, as providers, that they're traumatized by living in a country that doesn't value them and their life and who they are. They're already bringing trauma, regardless of what their presenting issue is, right? There's the underlying generational trauma, which is, what most of my research is on in the African-American community, is being passed down, like, just suck it up. And I was told that too. But that can lead into some trauma symptoms and manifestations of, like, well, what am I supposed to do with this energy or these feelings or these thoughts that I have if I'm just supposed to suck it up, right? Some of us eat it up, some of us smoke it up, some of us, gamble it up or whatever, but it's not healthy ways of dealing with things. So I would say the face of mental health is changing. We've had a lot of celebrities of color, Naomi Osaka, Serena Williams, Simone Biles, just coming out and just helping us to understand that there is no shame in seeking help. And I've been saying, I'm old, so I've been saying this for a long time. It's like maintaining your body. No one scoffs or looks at you crazy when you say, I'm having some chest pains, I need to go to the doctor. We're having pains, emotional and psychic pains, and we need to tend to it because it will emerge in some unhealthy way, whether it be now, later, internally, or demonstrated in our external, interpersonal relationships. So I think we look at mental health differently. And I don't even think more is the answer. I just think effective intervention is the key, rather than just, here, come on, go to the counselor, because I have all the answers. I don't know if y'all knew that, but anybody who's messed up in any way, has any problems or anything, go to the counselor and they will fix it. And then they'll send you back to class 10 minutes later and everything will be fine. But, clearly I'm being facetious, but yes, I think looking at mental health as maintenance too and ongoing, it's like a part of who we are. We need to integrate that into society and in our lives, especially like we make time to exercise or work out. We need to make time to take care of our psychological and emotional beings.
No, I think you make a great point. I know that, like, that's one of the things I've heard recently, like, that a mental health day. It's certain, and it's like you said, like, we kind of look at it as like, oh, mental health day. But like you said, if somebody said, hey, I have chest pains, or, it would be like, I'll take a day to go to the hospital, take a sick day, and just kind of normalizing somebody saying, hey, I just need a break. I need a mental health day. I need just some time to refocus. I think we haven't got there yet, but that's some of the things we need to begin to look at as well. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, if I may just jump on that. There are currently 8 or 9 states that do allow up to 5 mental health days for students. And I think, I recently went before the Penn Hills School Board and asked them to implement a policy that allows students those mental health days because I think it's essential. And even in my conversations since then, I've talked to students and they think it's an amazing idea. None of my students have said, oh, now I can, take off and go shopping or take off and just chill out. I think there's like this idea that, well, they're going to take advantage of it. Well, maybe, hopefully,
Yeah, good. Take full advantage.
Right. Not be hostile towards, the staff and maybe just that they know that we care. And many, many years ago when I was a student teacher, that was one of the first lessons I learned, that, you come out of school thinking, I know this and I know that theory and I know, these people and this research, and students do not care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? So us demonstrating in tangible ways through policy is significant, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah, and it's like, they'll just skip. Like, I don't understand. Like,
they're gonna take it anyway.
And just like you said, at that point when you institute it, you show the students that, like, oh, my school, hey, does your school prioritize mental health? Actually, my school, I can take up to 5 days for a mental health break. Like, now they feel like, okay, it's not just about just come regurgitate these facts and get out. That there's an atmosphere and environment that really cares for them. I had a question for you, Dr. Jones, because and I think, Dr. Alexander, you hit the nail on the head when you talk about a Black person in therapy. I was just in San Diego with over 300 families that were directly affected by police violence. And you talk about that trauma that gets passed down. But I'm interested, Dr. Jones, in how would you encourage a student? They might be in a family where, therapy is discouraged, not encouraged. Because that sometimes is, in our communities as well. Like, or, they might feel like they're in a situation where their school or the place that they're in isn't necessarily encouraging them. How would that person, and what steps can that person take to actually seek therapy, look into some things? Have you witnessed maybe some of these students kind of on their own, kind of finding it out, and what's the process?
Yeah, well, definitely. I think removing the stigma from our Black community, that therapy's just for white folk or crazy people or something like that. No, therapy
have money,
or for people that have money. So removing the stigma through education. If we approach therapy and good mental health in a way that is like a medical model and say our brain is an organ and it needs attention. And when that brain has been injured by trauma, it literally neurologically, there's a rewiring that happens. And so that autonomic nervous system kicks in and you're seeing the behaviors of disruptive disorder. You're seeing them falling asleep. You're seeing them being hostile and angry. These are all trauma reactions because there's been an injury to the system, to the way the brain is functioning. And so that alarm system, we call it the amygdala, that alarm system is saying something's wrong, something's not safe, this is not okay. When I sit down with Black folk in particular, because I'm Black, and I say, listen, this is neurological. This is scientific. This is just, you better get some act right while you acting like that. Get it together. Come on. He cutting up in class. That's not what that is. This is a symptom of what they've been through. And so just like if you had a symptom of the chest pain, I'm going to use that again, then you're going to go straight to the doctor. You're going to say, this is what the doctor told me to do, and I'm going to do it. So how come when we're having psychological pain and we are having symptoms of trauma, that we don't respond the same way? It's a myth that Black folk don't go to therapy. That's Black folk be in therapy, but they love to see brown faces across from them. Because now I don't have to get over this whole barrier of, do you understand? You don't get it, or you are Karen. I don't feel like explaining this and that. But when they come in and they see brown people, and we know a referral list of some Black and brown people that you can go to, now I can cut through all the mess and we can get down to business. You can now help me. So I want to even bounce on to what Bethany was saying about trauma-informed teachers and teaching them about what is crisis, what is trauma. This is so important. I had to double back because that trauma-informed pedagogy approach is so necessary. So I'm not penalizing what behavior I see in the classroom. I'm understanding it. I'm giving some grace. I'm saying, this is what you need. Let me get some referrals. Let me talk to the parent and actually offer some alternatives to just let me sit you at home and put you on the bench or whatever they do nowadays. If I understand that you're going through a crisis or you've been going through some type of traumatic situation, I'm going to know how to approach that with care, with respect, with information, instead of saying, they have to stay out of school for 10 days or something like that. So I think that's just really important to keep these teachers educated, but also thank goodness for Dr. Alexander being in the school. By the way, shout out to Penn Hills High School. I graduated from Penn Hills High School. And we had a Mrs. Betts at the time. I'm looking at Dr. Alexander as the new Mrs. Betts. So God bless you in there, caring about those children and being able to talk, brown face to brown face. Get in some therapy. It's going to get you some get right. You could get that through therapy.
No, I think you make a great point. I mean, and I think sometimes, just like you said, if it is a white therapist, sometimes like they suffer from the experience that we might have had with other white educators that wasn't something that valued us. You mentioned Penn Hills. I went to Gateway High School where we had one Black teacher. He taught typing. Like that was our Black teacher. But he kind of functioned as like a counselor. Like we all would go. I mean, like he had to do all that extra work. But just like you said, you might have somebody that's well-meaning. But that's the first barrier, is that a lot of times, you might have ran into educators that didn't value you, or like you said, they're not looking at your behavior as neurological. They're like, oh, you're bad, you're Black. They kind of put all of these stereotypes on you. So sometimes those are also those barriers that have to be walked towards. I did want to highlight this comment that it said the Jewish Healthcare Foundation has an initiative called PA Youth Advocacy Network that is working to get legislation passed authorizing mental health days for students. So shout out to them. I saw somebody else mention a Vision Towards Peace, a Black-owned provider. Shout out to Eric and the Vision Towards Peace, and DeMarcus and the Center for Relational Change, Julius and Still Smiling. It's wonderful to see Black folk kind of in this space, like you said, like kind of eliminating this stigma. One of the things, so talk about, Bethany, kind of how you all are engaging, because, Dr. Alexander mentioned, like, sometimes students don't have access to transportation to get mental health stuff, and sometimes we might not know where to go if students need medicine. Can you talk about like how you all are engaging and helping to really close that gap to help everybody get the mental health support that they deserve and need?
First, when you say Still Smiling, we're a huge supporter of Julius and Still Smiling. So I just want to throw that out there. And he's a great advocate for mental health services, especially in the Black community. But Stand Together was one of the programs that just through the Jewish Healthcare Foundation, they do an anti-stigma campaign in about 13 to 14 different, probably now 25 school districts that just does a one-year program. Like, do you remember Students Against Drunk Driving? It's all about mental health. And it's basically, they get mental health first aid training. They get QPR training, which is question, persuade, refer, which is suicide prevention training. If you're not familiar, also Act 71 in our schools, that's a suicide awareness mandate. It's mandated through the state of Pennsylvania, but it's an unfunded mandate. So when we're talking about mental health, this is another unfunded mandate when schools can just get a speaker to talk about suicide and they're done with that, like one and done. And when we're talking about mental health and trauma, and I had to do a shout out to Joni saying, we knew that when kids go to school hungry, they can't learn. But when kids come to school traumatized, they're not learning either. So until our society realizes that, these kids are not going to learn. But as far as the foundation goes, prior to COVID, we were finally seeing something and coming to terms that the schools and social service providers weren't talking the same language. And there was a way to break through. We were starting to work with Remake Learning to start like looking at why aren't we talking the same language? And then COVID happened, and we paused everything. But right now, where we're infusing our money to school districts is looking at different ways to bring different type of prevention models. So bringing mindfulness practices into schools. So teaching kids how to do deep belly breathing. And we're starting at the elementary level, because also in our state, Pennsylvania, through grades K through 2 is social emotional learning. We're mandated to teach kids social emotional learning, but we don't have it K through 12, which 8 states do. We just go to 2nd grade. I'm still a social emotional learning. I don't know about all you. So that's just one thing. So, and that's what our 21st century learners need is social emotional learning skills. And we're not teaching these kids all the way through 12th grade. But when we're talking about therapists, so Staunton Farm partnered with the School of Social Work to basically offset a training institute for LCSW supervisors to train LSW students that are BIPOC that need. We're basically trying to get more Black and Brown clinicians out into the community and that don't have resources. So Staunton Farm is, after this program, we'll have 64 licensed clinicians that will pay for we're paying for their supervision. Because after I talked to a lot of Black clinicians, that was a huge barrier for them to receive that C to do the clinical work. So that was a huge barrier. And, if you think about med schools and everything, they have residency programs, but in the mental health field, we don't have residency programs. We pay out of pocket to get that clinical degree. Whereas, you're going through Pitt med school, you're going to get your MD.
Right.
So it's a lot of jumping through hoops for clinicians in general. And I think it's a lot more harder for Black and Brown clinicians to get through those hoops, just because of financially, it's very hard. Some other cool projects we just funded, and I was talking to Dr. Jones before, we just funded Dr. Jay Hughley in the Just Discipline Project to bring in some social emotional learning and trauma-informed care to his Just Discipline Project. So he's able to bring more that mental health piece into restorative justice practice, which I think it should already be in, but now that he's bringing that more into those practices. And then at Clarendon School District, we just released a huge grant with them to work with Allegheny Health Network through the Chill Zone, and also teaching all the teachers and all the students in mindfulness, because it's all based on the same clinical idea of DBT therapy. So the whole district is going to have training in this mental health type of model, and it doesn't exist across the entire United States. So it's really exciting stuff that we're just trying to basically see different strokes for different communities, just trying to see, and therapy might not be for everybody. So just looking at different ways and different models for these kids to see. And I would be remiss if I didn't say my last one interesting thing I learned through COVID, just for my own, because I too have a child that's going at school age. She's in 2nd grade. I myself learned mental health clinician, but I didn't learn anything about learning disabilities. And if you're a mental health clinician, like I saw my kid's anxiety spike up. Like if she was in school, like she should have been in jail pretty much, because she was about to stab the teacher, run out of the classroom. Like, luckily I'm a person, I know I'm a white woman, I have a little bit of power, and I'm speaking my voice and advocating for my kid. But I could imagine if that was not my child and somebody else, that could have gone down really bad. But saying that, like, alone, we didn't realize she had a reading disorder. So all those anxious behaviors were because she had a reading disorder. So thinking about little kids, we're not looking at the whole kid. Like you were saying, like Dr. Amy was saying before, we're just making sure these kids are getting that material down and pushing them out and not looking at them as a holistic kid. And I think that's where I think schools are starting to realize and wake up, we have to be more holistic or we're going to lose these kids.
Absolutely. So we started a little late. So and I hope you all don't mind if we maybe go a little bit over, but I did have a question, and this is really for everybody. But I'll start with you, Dr. Alexander, because two things I feel like, and this is just me as a community advocate, really we're asking for help because, we've really seen this increase in community violence. That was one of the effects of what's happening in the midst of this global pandemic. And then also, there's been a lot of studies and conversations around social media and how social media has been directly affecting the mental health of students. I think at one point I heard that Instagram was trying to make an Instagram for kids. And I guess because of some of the studies that came out about how it affects people's mental health, they decided to scrap it. So what are some tools that, like me as an average, if I'm out in the community and trying to work with folks, are there some things I can do or learn that can maybe help me to navigate? And then how can we help, as folks are going through this rise in violence, maybe some issues on social media, are there some tools or things we can do that we can use to help the people that we love, like navigate through them?
I think that knowledge is the first thing. I think I'm working on some curriculum for a workshop, and the working title is Trauma is the New Black, because studies show and research shows that over 70% of adults have experienced some type of trauma. And I think normalizing that and saying you're not a freak, you're not crazy, and this was done to you. So often we take responsibility on ourselves as humans, and the kids do too. I don't know how many times I've heard them say, well, I just want to make my mom happy. And I say, oh, I didn't know you had that power. Why didn't somebody tell me that? Because I could just make everybody happy if I felt like it, right? So I think normalizing is really important, saying that you're not weird. This is something that human beings experience. Also, having them, this book, Lost, I have it right here, I'm looking at it, Lost in Transmission. It is such a great read in terms of understanding how trauma is passed on through parent and caregiver relationships is really significant. And I think saying that, I tell my students, I've been in therapy, like every good therapist has a therapist, it's essential. So when I say that have you really, and it makes them feel a little bit more, or I should say less apprehensive about that process, and also understanding that you're not going to connect with every therapist. And that's outside of the race aspect of things and gender identity and things like that. So don't give up. And that's what I tell them too. The first time you tried to ride a bike, did you give up when it didn't work? Because some people are like, I tried therapy, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, how did you go or where did you go? Well, this one time I went to see, I'm like, one time isn't gonna get it. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter who the therapist is. It could be Freud himself, and that's not gonna work. But so letting them know that it's normal to need adjustment. And I think Dr. Jones and Bethany were also saying earlier that I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought here. I'll go to something else because I can't remember what I was going to say. That's another sign of being old, but, as my daughters tell me. But I also think that having them around others who look like them and have had those experiences and can say, you're not crazy. Because even though when Dr. Jones was at Penn Hills, there was Mrs. Betts and perhaps Miss Dagger and Stubblefield and Mr. Polliver, like all these folks, that had gone away for a long time. And Amy was the only one, Dr. Alexander, person of color in the high school who was a professional educator. And more recently, the district has hired more people of color, which is fantastic. But that was a lot of burden on me. But I also was able to share with students that they weren't alone. And they were able to share with me that I was not alone. right? So I think those exchanges are really significant and important. And also letting them know that as people of color, research shows, again, that continual quotidian incidents of microaggressions or, racial discrimination have more of an effect on the psyche and the emotional well-being of people than one huge incident. So even though we tend to, look back on, 9/11 or, some other one incident, the things that Black folks live with every day, the people looking at you, people thinking that you're just there because of, this program or that thing, really has an effect. And when I show my students my humanity in that these things affected me too, as the only Black educator in that building full time, they're able to be a little bit more vulnerable, and understand that we all need someone to help us through those moments.
Definitely. If I could jump in, just when you were rattling off those heroes, those teachers, I remember every single one of them, and I felt this dose of nostalgia. But that's what we need as Black folk. We have a village approach to healing. We're not always going to lay across the couch and talk about all of our business, because our history is, don't take my business out in the streets. So what we have to do is we have to join what we know as social supports, family, grandma. I remember going to my grandpa's house and just talking to him and telling him all kind of stuff, and just sitting at the kitchen table. We got to bring that back to our community and say it's okay for the therapy. We're normalizing it. I love that. We're normalizing the symptoms, just like if it was a common cold, but we have to know what the symptoms of trauma are in order to identify it. Just like if my daughter or my son come in sneezing and snotting, I'm like, okay, this is what you probably have. Let me take your temperature. What's going on? We have to know trauma so quickly. We have to know what that looks like. And if they have this attention deficit, but they never had it before, this is probably trauma. If they're having a hyperactivity, but a traumatic event happened and they didn't have this before, it's probably trauma. You can stick it on there. But along with therapy and group counseling and things like that, we have to bring that village concept back to us. We got to talk to one another, hooking these kids up with Dr. Alexander's and Mrs. Betts and people like that. That meant the world to us. I went in Mr. Chandler's office to talk to him for 4 or 5 minutes or so, and he gave me a pass to go back to class. But these type of teachers, they were just teachers. They weren't all counselors. None of them were therapists, but they were my auntie away from home. They were my uncle. They were mom. They were all of that away from home. And I remember going in there and really feeling like I was getting some healing. That's what we have to join with our, what our Black and brown folks. That's what's going to work for us. We can't go to the Eurocentric way. We can't say, well, Europeans do it this way. White is right. We can't, because that's not how we heal. We heal completely different. And some of those concepts work. Mindfulness is awesome, but we have to pair it with what works for us as Black folk. We have to bring in our culture and our heritage and make it work our way, tailor make it. And so if the white therapist is not like, you can't help and service Black folk, but you have to be sure that you are culturally informed and that you are implementing and incorporating culture into our treatment, even taking the word treatment out of it. It's our time of healing. We heal. We have healers in our village and we heal. That's what we do.
Oh, wow. Now y'all getting down to it. Bethany?
There was so much I wanted to say back to that, but Dr. Jones, you just had one of the things I always ask when I'm looking at grants and grant proposals and things, I'm like, evidence-based work, who made this model? Who basically were these clinical trials put on? So that's why I think Staunton Farm is basically looking at different ways. And when we talk about mental health healing, and realize that it might look different for my community, it might look different from your community, it might look different from my zip code, it might look different for your zip code, because it's different, like that village approach. And I completely love the village approach, because I don't think we can heal individually, just because we all are collectively in this human race together. And we're stuck on this big floating planet together. So might as well try to figure out how to heal with each other. And I mean, the best things I want to say is that, like, for Dr. Alexander, Dr. Jones, like, I was one of those students in high school that had a suicide attempt and non-suicidal self-injury behaviors, and you know what the solution was? Send her home. So I had no supervision, getting into whatever it was that I could get myself into, and then ended up in Southwood Psychiatric Hospital. But there was no talk therapy. It was like, give her drugs and there's the fix. And I like to say that even 20 years later, it's still a little bit like that. Like, we're just going to give these kids some antipsychotics now at 14 years old, which I've seen kids on my caseload that had antipsychotics. And I'm like, what is going on? We don't know what's happening to this kid's brain with antipsychotics. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, this conversation is just like, we still have a lot of work to get through and a lot to do. And just having this conversation is so important to understand the differences. So I appreciate just having this conversation. So thank you.
No, thank you all. And I mean, I think it was a very formative. I wish we could go on for a couple hours. I'm glad we were able to get through some of the technical difficulties. So when Facebook gets up, we're going to post this on there and encourage folks to watch it. You know, we posted it in the comments, but we actually have a landing page for this conference and this conversation. It's studentvoicespa.com. The documentary is there, as well as what we're calling a jewel kit that has different things that educators can kind of tap into. Once again, want to thank Allies for Children, the Grable Foundation for supporting this work, and thank you Bethany, Dr. Jones, Dr. Alexander for helping us. You know, when you talked about that village, I think I saw it on our page, Dr. Alexander, where when the football game happened and, they weren't allowed any fans in Penn Hills versus Woodland Hills, but the students came together after the game, they ate pizza together, they talked, they shared. And to me, like, that's mental health, that's the healing, that's power in that. And it really made me feel good to see stuff like that taking place. And so, let's continue to check on our students. Let's continue to advocate for our students. Shout out to organizations like Stand Together. And let's continue to, be there as we move on. And so tomorrow, this is just day one of our education conference. We'll be coming to you all week with everyday learning skills. We're talking critical race theory. We're talking a whole bunch of stuff, and then on Friday we're going to have the students that participated in our film, and we're going to premiere our Student Voices documentary. And so, any last words, final comments? After you put your Twitter handle up there, Professor Toya, I guess that's all we can access right now.
Yes. Listen, my husband, shout out to Reverend Cordell Jones. Yes. He always tells me, you always forget to put your Twitter handle. So I remembered this time.
Absolutely. And Cornell, is Reverend Cornell Jones. He's on our board at One Hood Media, and he's one of the founding members of One Hood. So you already know that's family right there.
Yay, family.
Do you have anything you wanted to share, Dr. Alexander, before we close out?
Just real quickly, I just want to let people know that you're affected by things that aren't necessarily happening geographically near you. We talk about distal and proximal trauma. And oftentimes, we've had a lot of deaths by gunshots and things in the district recently, last year and this year. And sometimes the students will come to me or the parents and say, I didn't even know this person, but I'm so affected by it. And that is okay. And that is normal. And that is trauma. And the more we delve deeper into trauma and the study of, we see that one does not have to be present. One doesn't even have to be alive when we're talking about chronology to be traumatized by events that occurred, that have been passed down to us through the generations and across geography.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. Bethany, anything you would like to share?
The last thing I would just say is just when working with kids, because I've worked with kids, be human. let them see your vulnerabilities, just like anybody else you have a relationship with, because you're not going to build a relationship if you can't be vulnerable. So at the end of the day, show your true colors, and the kids will warm up. And it takes one adult to maybe change the trajectory of that child's life. And that's all I have to say, because one adult changed my life, and I'm sure one adult changed everyone's life maybe here. So I'm just making assumptions, but
that's such a powerful thing. When I was an educator, that was my thing was, I'm gonna treat you like a young adult. I worked in the high schools, and I'm gonna show you respect. And I never had an issue with any student, because I just always led with respect. Like you said, if you lead with love, you lead with respect, instead of that, like, I'm the teacher, you have to do it. I say they actually don't, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, let's all, and really in our own interpersonal things, we're still in a global pandemic, there's still a lot going on. Let's just lead with love. Let's lead with support. Let's lead with humanity. And, we can be the Pittsburgh that we say we are, but we know we need a lot of, we had to walk a lot farther to get there. So I just want to shout out, tomorrow we're back at 4 p.m. With real world skills. And our moderator will be Miracle Jones. There's it. Jessica and Angela are going to talk about real world skills. That's tomorrow at 4. And then tomorrow at 2, we're back with what Black Pittsburgh needs to know. That'll be at 2:00. We don't know if it'll be on Facebook, but if you're watching us on YouTube, just tune into YouTube, and we're gonna be here. But we have Felicity Williams, who's going to be our guest on what Black Pittsburgh needs to know. We're going to talk about a lot of very important stuff that's happening in Pittsburgh. And so until then, thank you all again for having us. Follow Professor Jones on Twitter, you know what I'm saying? And thank you all for your support, for your encouragement, and the work that you do every day to make sure our students have the help that they need. Really appreciate y'all. Peace. See y'all tomorrow at 4:00.